The night was colder than usual for late spring. Streetlights flickered along the quiet suburban road, and most families were already locked away in the comfort of their homes. But for Daniel Harper, a single dad raising his 10-year-old son, Jake, peace rarely came easy. Daniel was an ex-Marine turned auto mechanic, a man who had seen too much of the world's chaos but still clung to a deep belief. You protect what you love, no matter the cost. He lived by it every single day. And tonight, that belief would be tested in ways he never imagined. Jake tugged at his father's hand as they left the small diner they often visited on Friday nights. The smell of burgers and fries lingered in the air. Jake had been excited, chatting about his school project, when a sharp sound cracked the night, the unmistakable pop of gunfire. Daniel's instincts kicked in instantly. He pushed Jake behind him, his heart hammering. Across the street, a black SUV screeched to a stop. The doors flew open, and men in masks spilled out, guns drawn. At first, Daniel thought it was some random gang hit, until he heard the terrified scream. Jake whispered, clutching his sleeve, "Dad." Daniel's eyes snapped toward the source. Near the SUV, a girl about Jake's age was being dragged out by one of the men. Her hair fell loose, her dress torn in the struggle. She cried out desperately, fighting, but the men shoved her toward the vehicle. And that's when Daniel saw her. Not the girl, though her fear carved into his chest like a blade, but the woman running after her. A woman in heels, her designer coat flaring in the wind, shouting with a voice that carried both authority and raw, maternal terror. "Let go of my daughter." The men didn't listen. One aimed his weapon at the woman, forcing her to halt. The other tightened his grip on the child. Daniel didn't think. He moved. "Stay down, Jake," he said, his voice low but commanding. He sprinted across the street, years of training guiding his every step. One of the kidnappers spotted him, swung the gun upward. But Daniel was faster. He slammed into the man, knocking the weapon aside. The child slipped free, stumbling toward her mother. "Run!" Daniel barked. But in that split second of victory, another shot rang out. Daniel felt it tear into him, hot, sharp, burning. His body jerked, but he stayed on his feet, turning his body to shield the girl. His arms wrapped around her small frame as he whispered, "You're safe, kid." The world blurred, his knees buckled, and everything went black. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was in a hospital bed. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled his lungs. Pain throbbed through his side, but he was alive. He blinked against the harsh lights, confused, until he saw Jake asleep in a chair beside him. And then, another face came into focus. A woman, elegant, composed even in exhaustion, sat across from him. But her eyes told a different story. Gratitude, guilt, relief. "You saved her," she said softly. Daniel's throat was dry. "Your daughter?" The woman nodded. "Lila. She's 10. Same as your boy, I think." She glanced at Jake, still curled up in the chair. Her voice cracked. "If it weren't for you." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, the weight of her words heavy. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. Her name was Charlotte Hayes, CEO of one of the largest tech firms in the country. She was a woman used to power, control, and precision. But nothing had prepared her for the moment masked men tried to steal her daughter from her arms. She visited Daniel every day as he recovered. She brought meals, books, even toys for Jake. At first, Daniel resisted. He wasn't comfortable accepting anything. But Charlotte was relentless in her gratitude. One evening, she arrived with Lila, the little girl whose life Daniel had shielded with his own body. She stood shyly at the foot of his bed, her small hands twisting nervously. Then, without a word, she stepped forward and hugged him. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're my hero." Daniel's chest tightened. He wasn't a hero. He was just a father doing what fathers do. But looking at her, he realized something had changed. His sacrifice had rippled outward, binding their lives together in ways neither could have predicted. As the weeks passed, Daniel's wound healed, but something else grew in its place, an unexpected friendship between two families who lived in entirely different worlds. Charlotte invited Jake and Daniel to her home for dinner one evening. Jake's eyes went wide at the sprawling estate, the kind of place he'd only seen in movies. He clung to his father at first, nervous among the marble floors and chandeliers. But Lila pulled him by the hand into her playroom, where laughter soon echoed down the halls. Charlotte poured Daniel a glass of wine, her expression thoughtful. Do you realize what you did? You didn't just save my daughter. You changed everything for me. Daniel raised an eyebrow. How's that? She hesitated, then admitted, I built this empire, but I lost pieces of myself along the way. I thought money could protect her. That power meant safety. But in that moment, all I could do was watch. You showed me what real courage looks like. And what love really means. Daniel swallowed hard. He'd never seen himself as more than a man trying to survive for his son. But her words dug deep. One rainy afternoon, weeks later, Daniel received an unexpected call. The kidnappers had been caught. It turned out they weren't random criminals. They were insiders, disgruntled former employees of Charlotte's company, targeting her family for revenge. Daniel felt a strange mix of relief and anger. The idea that a child had been dragged into adult greed infuriated him. When he told Jake, the boy asked, Dad, would you have done it if it wasn't me? If it was just some stranger's kid? Daniel looked into his son's eyes, steady and firm. I'd do it for anyone's child. But I'll always do it for you first. Jake smiled, though Daniel noticed the way his son's gaze softened, like he finally understood the depth of his father's love. Life didn't go back to normal, not exactly. Something had shifted. Charlotte often invited Daniel and Jake over, sometimes for big dinners, sometimes just to sit by the fireplace and talk. Slowly, their families wove together, two single parents trying to give their kids the best of themselves. For Jake, who had grown up with so little, Charlotte's world was dazzling. But it wasn't the wealth that mattered, it was the warmth. For Lila, who had been surrounded by luxury but not always presence, Daniel's grounded kindness filled a void she didn't know she had. One evening, as the kids played board games in the living room, Charlotte turned to Daniel. You know, I used to believe I had to do it all alone, she said quietly. That asking for help was weakness. But you've shown me that strength is something else entirely. Daniel glanced at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. He thought of his own struggles, raising Jake on his own, patching together a life from the scraps left after war and heartbreak. Maybe, he said with a small smile, we were both meant to learn that lesson. Months passed, and what began as tragedy grew into something neither of them expected. A bond that felt unshakable. Jake and Lila became inseparable, their laughter echoing in every room they shared. And Daniel found himself looking forward to Charlotte's presence in a way that both scared and comforted him. He never wanted to be her hero. But somehow, in saving her daughter, he'd saved a piece of himself, too. And as he tucked Jake into bed one night, listening to the boy whisper, Dad, we're lucky, huh? Daniel finally allowed himself to believe it. Yes. They were. Because sometimes, the act of protecting one life doesn't just save a child. It changes two families forever.